Ready for the first question. First question is, what strategies have you found effective in helping youth and young adults feel connected or involved in the ministry of the church? And how would you capture the energy and passion of youth and young adults for effective ministry in the church?
Music and mission. This generation of young people have started actually more charities in this country than any other generation in our country's history. They're passionate about global poverty, about water, about hunger. And they live a life that is very committed and concerned with making a difference. They also live a life that has a soundtrack. There's a reason that those iPods are all out there and everywhere. And that soundtrack is what they're listening to. And I hate to tell you this, but they're not listening to sermons and NPR. Can we marry those two in the church? I think we can. At St. Andrew, we've done that through mission trips, where music as well as making a difference are put together. We have a woman in our congregation, Emily McKenna, who went to several mission trips through high school. She later left our congregation during college for a more conservative congregation and came back her senior year, and I saw her and I just asked her, I said, what changed? What's different? She said, well, I just realized I didn't want to have that much judgment part of my life. And she's now in a master's program at the New School for Social Research in New York City in international development. So I think mission and music and pulling those two things together is one way.
What issue of social justice most concerns you, and how have you been involved in addressing it?
You know, I saw this question, and it was a very good question for me to think about for a long time. And I realized I could say work to and with the poor, but I realized the real answer for me is more of a theme rather than an issue. And the theme is that what I become passionate around social justice issues is the opportunity to move somebody who doesn't care about an issue or maybe is a little interested, and to move them to a place where they're very passionate about an issue. And so, you know, inviting somebody to donate to a food pantry, then getting them to serve on the food pantry, then inviting them to be a part of a shelter at a soup kitchen, and then inviting them to have conversation with homeless people at a shelter, and then, you know, moving them along that progression so they get to the point where they're then advocating for that shelter and they're advocating for that issue and the root causes of that issue. So the way I look at it is, if it's me and my issue, that's great, that's fine, but the theme of my ministry has been trying to help people make that move from disinterest to passion. Now, you don't always make it, but if you can move them somewhere along the way, then maybe they impact somebody else. So for me, it's more that theme of multiplication on the issue of social justice than it is one particular issue.
In a world of rapidly changing communications technology, what are the challenges and opportunities that communications technology presents to the ministry of the church?
You know, the Gutenberg printing press was nothing without content. And the technology changes, but it's the content that makes all the difference. What is the #1 digital medium that is the competitor, if you will, with the church? It's film. It's Hollywood. It's storytelling, which is what Hollywood does. And now we don't have budgets to compete on that level, but we're in the storytelling business, folks. It goes way back. And Genesis, Jonah, the Gospels. Len Sweet has this phrase where he talks about, I'm not sure I like the image, but that God planted time bombs in Scripture, and that periodically throughout history, different books go off, explode. So Romans was exploding at the time of the Reformation, and now, because we're in a very much of a storytelling narrative culture, it's Genesis, it's Jonah, it's the Gospels, it's parables. In the laptop that I have in my bag and the little tiny point-and-shoot camera, there's enough technology in there for anybody with a day's worth of training to tell some stories about what's going on in your congregations, about how the gospel is being connected to people in your congregations. We need to tell those stories. There are great stories just in New England that need to be shared. So for me, it's looking at the whole social media thing and asking, what's the content that we want to communicate, and how are we going to do that?
What are your strongest gifts, and how do you see them used in your ministry as bishop?
My mother tells me that it started in 5th grade when I organized a petition drive to have equal rights with the 6th grade. It's a true story. You know, at St. Andrew, we have a great music ministry, but I have no musical ability. And we have a wonderful care ministry team, and I am still clumsy in a hospital. And we have a wonderful group of people that do faith in action projects in our community, and I'm still trying to figure out which way to hold the hammer. So how have all those things happened? Call it ministry, call it leadership. It's just something that God gave me a long time ago, and I just tend to be this person who gathers people, looks at a situation, says, what do we need to do, who can do it, pull the team together, and then we go at it. And so that's really kind of core to who I am, and it just is kind of there, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. And I was going to say more about that, but that's basically it. It's the gift of leadership, of leading people, and taking people from here to there, which is very simple. But anybody that does it, whether you're in a school or a hospital or a church, you know that that's not easy to do.
The Synod has invested a good deal of time, energy, money, and prayer in the Doing What Matters process. How will this work inform and guide you as you begin your term? Pastor Hazelwood.
Well, the person on the Synod staff who's working on this I have intimate relations with. And she's married to somebody who, well, that's another story. Go where love calls. A lot of people could kind of question that statement about and then serving where love takes us, analyze it theologically. But when you think about it, the spirit of it is right there in the Abrahamic blessing, the call to be a blessing, the Great Commission, Matthew 28, the decision by the church in Acts 15 to go out into the world. And it's a modern way maybe, of articulating what's our task. So the question really now is a question of implementation. And I think that the whole Doing What Matters process helps us really focus. And I guess that's the one thing I will say in the next 13 seconds that I have, is that I think that as a synod, we need time, energy, money, resources will force us to become more focused. And having this tool of focusing our attention and our energy is where we're going to go with this next, no matter who's the next bishop, and it helps us to stay focused, and I think that's its greatest asset to us.
Share a time in your ministry when your only option was to trust God.
Well, you know, I just listening to all this, I had the same answer as Ross and Lyndon said the same thing that we were all going to right now. And I was going to give a different answer, but I just have this sense right now of I'm in a different place than I was an hour or two ago, which was nervous, kind of uptight. Would I remember all the questions? Did I get them in the right order? Would I answer one question in one way, and then they would ask the other question a little bit later, and then I would answer the same thing again, and then you would think, oh, he can't remember anything. You know, and all that anxiety, and I just, so for me, it's, the right now is trusting God. I just, sitting up here, I feel like this synod can't go wrong. You know, and so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Healthy leadership encourages mutual accountability. Describe a conflict that you were not able to resolve. What did you learn, and what would you do differently?
So I didn't grow up in the church, so therefore I didn't learn the culture of the church is to be nice, no matter what. So my first call is in Brooklyn, New York, world capital of niceness. It's up there with Minnesota. And this guy comes, we have been working on revitalizing that congregation and that kindergarten through 8th grade school, and there's this one family in particular, we're going back and forth, and he came into my office one day after work, said he wanted to meet with me. Sat down on the couch, and he had a clipboard with a pad of paper, which you just know what's coming. And he just proceeded to list off and rifle at me for about 15, 20 minutes, all kinds of things. So I finally stopped, and I said, Peter, his real name is George, but I'll change it to Peter. What do you want? And he said to me, he looked right at me, I was like 28 at the time, he said, my goal is to get you out of here in 6 months. I stood up, walked over to the door, opened the door, and just motioned for him to go out. And he said, I'm not done. And I said, yes, you are. And it was tough after that. That was the beginning of hell. But I learned from that experience that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to be tough. And that sometimes it requires you to stand up and be big. I can do that. And you have to do that. And inside, I'm just... But the interesting thing that happened after that story is about 6 months after his family left was all of a sudden, and I don't know if there's a connection, Friedman would maybe know, but all of a sudden people started coming into this congregation.
Thank you. Given the long history of gradually declining mission support from congregations and steadily smaller synod budgets, do you think the New England Synod needs to give more, do more with less, or do less and do it better?
So my response is, are those the only three choices? So the model that we have is a model that worked in the modern world, but we're not in the modern world, we're in the postmodern world. And the model is local people give to the local religious club, which passes on part of it to the regional club, which passes it on to the national club. It worked well, but it's not working anymore. Now, please do not hear what I am not saying. I am not saying to end that. But what I am saying is that we need to start to look at other ways and augmenting it. For instance, as an example, do you know that since about 2005, about $100,000 from people in the New England Synod have gone to Honduras? Why? Because people like Amanda Nelson from Attleboro or Ed Martin from House of Prayer, they go, they get connected, they become passionate, and there's no question. It's not an issue. It's not even something they vote. They volunteer. I was just talking with Steve Dumas. He has conversations with people in Honduras. They talk about what's going on, and he writes a check. So I think there's a way in which we can connect people, because when you're connected to actual discipleship, you don't even think about whether it's 10% or 20%. It just flows out of your faith and out of your experience from it. So my answer is yes, but let's look at it in maybe new ways, maybe creative ways to find new ways of finding the resources that can help us do God's work in the world.